This is StarTalk, a very special edition. We are celebrating the 10th anniversary of Felix Baumgartner's Red Bull jump from the edge of the stratosphere, where he fell and accelerated to faster than the speed of sound, long before he would later deploy his parachute, setting a record for the highest free-fall jump ever. Yeah, we've got him. We're going to reminisce about what was going on in his head when he took the jump, the physics of free fall when you jump out of a balloon, and a little bit of the physiology of it too. And that will happen on this special one-on-one explainer edition of StarTalk. Felix, welcome, dude.
Hey, what up, everyone? Thanks for having me on your show, Neil. I'm very excited.
Wow. So I can't believe it was 10 years ago because it feels like yesterday. Does it feel like yesterday for you?
No, not at all, because I've done so many things.
Very good.
If you're just hanging around on your couch, maybe it feels like it was yesterday, but I was doing a lot of things the last 10 years. I don't even know where to start.
A busy guy. So let's just get the fundamentals of that jump back in front of us all. So you had on a pressurized suit. It looked very much like a moon suit of some kind. It has to keep the air pressure and temperature regulated. And you were brought aloft in a balloon. Is that correct?
Yeah, all the way up to 130,000 feet.
130,000. Has any human being ever existed at that elevation who was not otherwise in an airplane or a rocket?
Well, airplanes don't fly that high. Rockets, of course, they do. People have been on the moon. That's way higher. Actually, it's on another planet. But as far as I know, as far as I remember, nobody has been higher. And it's the biggest balloon ever launched in history.
And here's an interesting fact I think people don't always know or think about. The size of the balloon at 130,000 feet is very different from the size of the balloon when you left Earth's surface. Could you just comment on that?
Well, the thing is, when you launch it, you have to keep in mind it's thinner than a sandwich bag, which makes the balloon very fragile. It's very delicate, So even putting the balloon out of the box and then you lay it parallel to the runway is already difficult, You cannot pull on the balloon because you will damage the material a little bit, and then it creates a malfunction on launch, So once you fill it up with helium, it's like a giant sausage, with a little bit of a helium bubble on top. And once you launch it, the higher you go, the less outside pressure you have. That means the balloon with the ascent will expand, and at skydiving altitude at 130,000 feet, it's like a giant ball, it looks completely different versus when it has left the ground. So it's very interesting to look at it. And it was very visible from the ground. People could see it.
Oh my gosh. Oh, interesting. Because normally if some planes at 130,000 feet, you don't see them at all. They're too small and invisible. So all right, it's one thing to go up on a balloon. It's another thing to abandon it in place and just jump. So, we've heard this saying when asked, some people say, will you ever skydive? And they'll say, no, I will never jump out of a perfectly good airplane, implying that if something's wrong, if something's wrong with the plane, of course you're going to want to jump out of it. You don't want to crash with it. So you had a perfectly good balloon that you jumped out of. So was this just to set a record, or is there some other motive or driver for this?
First of all, when you look at my background, I did a lot of base jumps around the world. A lot of them have been illegal. I base jumped off the Jesus statue in Rio de Janeiro, the Petronas Twin Towers in Kuala Lumpur. I base jumped off the highest building at that time in 2007, the Taipei 101 Financial Center in Taiwan.
These are iconic. These are iconic structures, right? Yeah, it's not just a high place; it's a high, important place.
That's why I selected those objects.
And just I'm a city kid. Just tell me what base jumping means.
Base jumping is a special form of skydiving, and it means you're jumping from fixed objects. Base does not stand for base; it stands for B, like building; A, antenna tower; S, span, like bridges; and E is Earth. This is what base stands for.
I never knew that. Okay. And you have a parachute or some kind of a gliding parachute, correct?
You have a base parachute, which is a special designed parachute. It opens faster. There's also a different way to pack it to make it open faster. It's only one parachute because by the time when you open that parachute, you're already so low, a second parachute would not help. So that's the difference between a regular skydiver and a base jumper. We only use one parachute.
Didn't know that. Okay, so because they're you can steer it, I think, right? You have some
Yeah.
control over where you go. Are you susceptible to updrafts that could sort of that'll enable your flight to persist longer than otherwise?
Not really. It's not like paragliding. I do that as well, but paragliding it's a way bigger parachute or paraglide. It's completely made out of a different fabric. It has less air that goes through. That's why you can use thermals. You can use the updraft, but not on base jumping. Of course, it's wind is a factor, especially on opening, because if the wind is coming from the wrong side, it will turn your parachute around. We call this off-heading opening. That means it's especially when you do buildings, and it turns your parachute around 180 degrees. You hit the building, the parachute collapse, and you most likely die. That's when you start base
I don't
jumping.
mean to laugh, but you describe this so calmly. Well, if it turns around and you hit the building and die.
That's what it
Okay.
is. So it all depends on your pack job, and on making the right judgment. Sometimes when the wind is not to your favor, you have to call it off. This is your insurance.
Okay, so but in this jump, however, it's not a base jump, it's not a skydive. You actually were in free fall for some amount of time until you ultimately did open a parachute. So what
Yes.
was we're glad you did that because okay. So what? Talk me through what it is to free fall through thin air, but the air is getting thicker and thicker. So you would hit some maximum speed before the air slowly brought you back down to what we all know is like the terminal velocity of a body falling through the atmosphere.
Well, the thing is, if you go all the way up to 130,000 feet, the air is so thin because the molecules are so far apart. That means the air allows you to travel so fast. That's why we selected that altitude.
There's hardly any air resistance at that point.
It's almost like a vacuum.
Right. Okay.
So that's the reason why we went all the way up to 130,000 feet. And once you step off, you accelerate so fast. So within 50 seconds, just think about this. I was accelerating to 890 miles an hour, which is equivalent to Mach 1.25. So Mach 1 is supersonic speed, but I was even get faster than supersonic speed. Mach 1.25, it's faster than a bullet. It's pretty fast.
Okay, so was that the velocity where and you've fallen far enough where the air is now slowly trying to slow you down again?
Exactly. So at the 90,000 feet, there's a thicker layer of air. Comes in very progressive, so you can feel it. So before it's thin air, there's almost no resistance, which also means at the same time, all your skydiving skills that I developed the last 30 years are pretty much useless because you have no resistance. You cannot use the air to your own advantage.
You live that, but we see that in movies where where someone jumps second and the person ahead of them, their parachute didn't open up, so then they do into a straight dive to minimize their air resistance. They catch up and then they open up again. So I think we've seen this, and this is what you're describing. None of that's available to you in extremely thin air. That's your point.
That's the problem. So that means you have to be really patient for a while until you hit a layer of thicker air, and then your skydiving skills are coming back into play, and now you can use your skydiving skills to position yourself. And that happens at around 90,000 feet.
Okay, and so then you slowly slow down until I guess, the air keeps getting thicker and it keeps slowing you down. And so at the point you deployed your parachute, how fast were you going?
Well, at the very end, it's just a regular skydive. And around 5,000 feet, I was deploying my parachute, and that's like a regular skydive.
Okay, and so were you going 100, 200 miles an hour? About that, perhaps?
200 miles an hour is too fast. I don't
Uh-huh.
know in miles, but I would say 120.
This is America, Jack. We do miles here.
Yeah, that's the problem. I always have to convert. As an Austrian, I have to think about all those numbers if I'm
Thank,
doing it in
thank you for
German.
converting as much as you've done even thus far in this
I do.
podcast. So, so this was not just a casual thing you did. This was an internet sensation at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was the most most watched streamed event ever on YouTube. Is that correct?
That is true. It's interesting because yesterday I was on in another TV show with Claude Roubaix. He was the former YouTube boss at that time, and he was in charge when they broadcasted my jump from Stratosphere live back in 2012. And back in 2012, it was a complete different game to broadcast something at that size because they originally thought there's a maximum 400,000 or 500,000 people will dial in at the same time. But then once the balloon has left, with every foot that it was going higher, the numbers getting higher and higher, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million.
Wow.
They were hanging out at Google Hangout, and they looked at each other like, where is this going to go? Because they knew at around 4 million people, they thought their server will collapse.
Wow.
And it was very interesting because, we were both sitting in the same hot seat. I knew I have to deliver because the whole world is watching. He knew he has to deliver because the whole world wanted to watch. And if we both fail, he's most likely losing his job and I will lose my life, So at that point, we were both stressed out, but luckily it worked, I could finish my skydive and they never stopped broadcasting.
So has your record been broken since then?
The altitude record did. Only 2 years later, Alan Eustace.
So how come I know about you, but I don't know about him?
That's a good question. It's an easy answer because most of the people don't remember this because we did it live, and he just strapped a couple of cameras on his suit and they showed it on the next day. And if you see something live, it really burns into your brain for the rest of your life because it's very interesting to watch it. It's nerve-wracking, as you probably remember, and that's the reason why not a lot of people remember Alan Eustace. But it was still a good jump. I mean, he had a different approach. Instead of a capsule, he was not using a capsule. He was just attached with his suit. It was a different type of suit. It's called an EVA, External Vehicular Activity Suit, which is pretty much a capsule with arms and legs, very bulky. You had to bring him on a stroller because he cannot walk in that suit. And then they released him 2 kilometers, a couple thousand feet higher.
And released him with what? Was he in a balloon or some other device?
He was hanging on a balloon, on a much smaller balloon, because the fact that they're not having a capsule means they get rid of a lot of weight. It means they could use a way smaller balloon, which is easier to launch, and that smaller balloon, of course, goes higher.
Right, of course.
They released it manually from the ground, and then he was using a rogue chute. So as soon as he got released, they fired a rogue chute, which is kind of a stabilization chute. So he was riding all the way down in free fall on a stabilization chute. And that has two meanings. That means he could not fall as fast as I did. And the second thing is he does not apply for the same record category.
Okay, because it's not a free fall.
Right. It's not an unaided free fall.
Got it.
It's an aided free fall, with using a stabilization device, and that's a different category.
So taking this jump, you're doing things that you hadn't done before with all of your base jumping. And so tell me what role Joe Kittinger played in this. I read about him briefly, but tell me who he was to you.
Joe, first of all, it's a great character. I mean, that guy is a tough cookie. I have to say that, very stubborn sometimes, military background, very interesting character, but also a lot of fun. That guy has such a great sense of humor, and everybody loved Joe. That's why he was an important role on the team, not because of his great sense of humor, of course.
That helps.
It helps, because it brings up a lot of good emotions while working on something so difficult. So sometimes humor really helps, especially in those dark times, when nothing is moving forward. But also Joe brought a lot to the table because he did something very similar back in the 60s. He did a skydive from 101,000 feet back in the 60s, just think about this.
Right.
And what I really admire on Joe, you have to give a lot of credit to Joe, at that time, he only had 33 skydives on his belt. And I remember when I had 33 skydives, I could barely make it out of an airplane,
Mm-hmm.
So he's standing there with his spacesuit, on an open gondola. It had just had some curtains to block the sunlight, And then he did it, And he was, of course, did not break the speed of sound, but he was very close. And he was an important asset because the only one be there, done that. And he helped me so much, not only on the developing process, also on the actual day when I was sitting in that capsule, that deep, calming voice that Joe Kittinger had.
Oh, wow.
Guiding me all the way up because I'm sitting there, it's not an easy task because there's just so many things that you have to do. You're doing something you never did before. And also at the same time, the whole world is watching.
So it's not just the physics of it, and the physiology, it's the
Mentally.
psychology, the mental.
The psychology,
Yeah.
And then listening to somebody's voice, and Joe has a really cool, deep voice. It's very interesting to listen to. A very calming voice. And of course, you trust Joe because this is the only person on the planet who know what it means, who know what it takes because he has done the same thing 50 years ago, sitting in the same capsule or in a very similar capsule, going all the way up to 101,000 feet. So that is a real pioneer to me.
So I'm told that he was part of his experiments were to see what might happen to Mercury astronauts if they were to eject too high up. I mean, this is not just he didn't do it just for grins, right? He did
No.
Yeah, it was an assignment, right?
It was a military project called Man High. And what they did is before they go into the moon, they had to find out is a high altitude bailout and safe re-entry back to Earth possible. They were testing spacesuits, they were testing all kinds of stuff because it was one important step or one important piece of a puzzle on the way to the moon. Joe Kittinger signed up for this. He was a former Air Force colonel. He served in Vietnam. He also got shut down. So he has a really interesting background, but it never broke Joe. He never lost his great sense of humor. He's a very adorable human being.
Well, a shout out to Joe, just as part of American history and just Man High. I love the name of that program, Man High.
Yeah.
So let's get a little philosophical here. This is the highest altitude at which you've ever observed Earth's surface. Did you feel any different just standing there before you took the jump, or were you too revved up that there was no time for philosophizing?
No, well, I started skydiving when I was 17 years old. So my journey to the stratosphere already started at that time without knowing, I just jumped out of an aircraft, of a perfectly fly aircraft, like you said, at the age of 17. It was a childhood dream, and this was the moment where everything started. And then I became a military paratrooper, and I was always interested in skydiving. Then I started in '86. In '96, I started base jumping. So all those different steps have been important to develop skills, to develop a relationship with Red Bull, to get confident. And then later on, when I signed up for Red Bull Stratos, it was interesting to me because on all those base jumps that I did, at a certain point, I kind of felt like I'm constantly repeating myself. So I wanted to do something different, And also, I have to say, after 9/11, it was not so cool anymore to trespass and sneak into buildings and that kind of stuff. It became not cool anymore, after 9/11. So we had to change gears, and that's why I signed up for Red Bull Stratos. And this was a completely different game because now I have to become a team player, Before, as a base jumper, it's a very simple relationship. It's me, my parachute, my decision making. Yeah. But on Red Bull Stratos, there's just so many people involved, and sometimes you go into a meeting with 4 problems and then you leave that meeting with another 4 problems on top of it and no solution. So it's very frustrating. And originally we thought this was going to take 2 years, then we ended up working 5 years on this program.
Speaking of the World Trade Center, if you look in our archives of StarTalk, we actually interviewed Philippe Petit. And I was just
Man on Wire.
It was around the time that the movie came out. Right.
Yeah.
And it was
I'm a big fan.
And just to see what effort it took to just basically sneak in, like you were saying, and then and send a rope across to the other side so that you can then I mean, it required a lot of subterfuge to make that happen. So, are there anyone who has tried this before but just died, and so no one's talking about them?
Yeah, Nick Piantinidis, it's a very difficult name. He was a truck driver, and he was the first non-military person trying to break Joe Kittinger's record. Nick Piantinidis.
Yeah, I was just wondering because there are people. We're just coming through Columbus Day here in the United States, and Columbus is remembered, right, for all that he did or didn't do, but he's remembered, and he came across in the middle of hurricane season. Yet there was no hurricane. Okay, so I'm just wondering, how about Arnold Schmednick? Did he try to cross the ocean and is now at the bottom of the ocean because a hurricane took him out and no one remembers him? Right? We remember the hits and not the misses, the successes and not the failures.
I mean, Nick, you have to give credit to Nick Piantinidis because he was able, as a truck driver, never forget that, to get access to a spacesuit. Right? Very difficult, but he was able to convince some people to get him a spacesuit, and he went all the way up. He was already higher than Joe Kittinger. This is
Okay,
important.
Got it. Yes.
When he was at jump altitude, the door was already open, but he could not disconnect the oxygen hoses because they were frozen. Oh. There were steel oxygen hoses, could not disconnect them. So now he had to remain in the capsule. They had to cut him loose. He was riding it down. And when he landed, his visor was open, so he somewhere on the way down, his visor, he had a crack. I think he suffered a lack of oxygen for a long time, turned into a vegetable. I think he lived another 3 months and then he died in hospital. Wow. It's a very tragic story. But, I mean, that's the big learning out of this that's why we were successful. You always have to test things. You can never go from zero to hero. And that's why we had a long ongoing program. We have been at Field Air Force Base, did a lot of chamber testing. We have been at Sacramento. This is where they train all the space shuttle guys.
Well, if I remember, I caught part of the live. We were moving back and forth between images of you and some control center, if I remember correctly. Wasn't there a bunch of people like at base camp monitoring everything about you?
Yeah, mission control. Joe Kittinger wasn't there.
Okay.
Guiding me all the way up, but he was in charge. He was Capcom 1, and he was guiding me all the way up. There's a lot of scientists around, and if there's a problem, Joe talks to the scientist tells him what to do, and then Joe talks to me again. So the only person talking to me was Joe Kittinger, but everybody around was supporting Joe.
I hate to burst your bubble here, but yes, everyone in mission control wanted you alive, but the 8 million people who watched you, some percentage of them are they're saying, is he going to die? You know this. Just I don't want to be the first to break this news to you.
It's the old Colosseum way of thinking. The gladiators in the Colosseum the same way.
Right. If they survive, great, but you're really there to watch them die, right? And then if they survive, they're heroes.
I know. I'm very aware of that, but I don't really care because that's why we did such a long ongoing research, and development to make sure that's not going to happen.
Do you the way you've described your life in these brief moments we've had together, it's as though, like, yes, in the last 10 years you haven't stopped. You're still jumping off of things where you could have just
take the elevator
or gone home and stayed on the couch, right? We've established
I'm not a couch guy. I'm not a couch guy.
Apparently not. So is there something in your bloodstream that requires this level of suspense and risk taking? Whereas if you don't do it, somehow you'll just explode for not putting your life at risk?
It's not that I'm explode, but it's probably my DNA because the way how I've been raised, my dad is a carpenter, my mother was a housewife, my brother became a chef. So it's not in the family,
Okay. Yeah, clearly not.
It's clearly not in the family, but even as a kid, I was always climbing trees from a very early age on. And I always liked to see the world from above, the bird view, but of course, as a kid, you're very limited on doing things, but that's the
Of
reason
course.
why I started skydiving when I
Because your
was
parents
16.
are trying to keep you alive. Did you get the message there? This is
And
the
away from all the fun. And
this
away
is
from
the
all the fun.
job of the parents. Okay, don't fault them for that. All right. But let me return to the point of philosophy here. You are looking at Earth from a very different place. Are you distracted by the details of the mission, or did you have a time to just reflect on that moment?
I took my time, like I said, it was so much work to reach that point. It took me from age of 17 all the way to 43. Yeah. And then I'm standing there on top of the world, knowing that now it's a step into the unknown. So I was trying to embrace that moment. I was trying to inhale it, because it took us so much work to get there. And I was standing outside and it's completely silent. There's no noise up there. All I could hear is myself breathing. Then you look up, you see black sky. So it's a very interesting moment, very peaceful in one way, but at the same time, that you have a mission to accomplish.
Well, just remind people, you are high enough in the atmosphere in the daytime that there's hardly any air molecules above you to turn the sky blue. So the sun is out and you have a black sky. I just want to clarify that for anyone who wasn't following.
Very good explanation.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I've never seen during daylight black sky. Yeah, first time in my life. Took me 53 years to figure that out. So as much as I wanted to stay there a little longer to embrace that moment, once you disconnect your oxygen hoses from the ship system, from my capsule, I only have 10 minutes of oxygen left from my bailout bottles. And that's what my team told me, Felix, do not overdo it. We know you want to stay there, you want to enjoy that moment, but you really have to press on because you need that oxygen on the way down.
No time to do a happy dance. You can't do a happy dance.
No happy dance, no nothing, But 1 minute, probably 1 minute, I enjoyed the view and everything else, trying to put that in my memory for the rest of my life. And then I had to do this one step forward into the unknown.
Okay, so I think you should donate your body to, I hope you live a long, natural life, and donate your body to to medicine and have them investigate what's coursing through your veins, because it's in so few other people out there. Or do some slices of your brain and find out what the hell is wrong with this guy. Or maybe it's not what's wrong with him, but what's right with him, because without people such as yourself. I mean, I count you as extreme among those who take risks, but in the category of risk takers, without them, we might still just be in the cave saying, no, it's dangerous out there, outside the door.
Now you're making some points, my friend.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that we are where we are, not because everyone is a daredevil, but some of us are, showing the way, so that because some risks bring huge rewards, cultural, spiritual, emotional. And so let me just publicly thank you on behalf of our fan base and others for just reminding us of what is possible to achieve just being human.
I appreciate that a lot. I mean, just think about the Wright brothers, Otto von Lilienthal, all these people, when it happens, when somebody has an idea and it starts, everybody's looking at these people like, what is wrong with these people? And maybe 50 years later, we understand. And now we all can fly to different places.
We catch up with them. We catch up with them.
Yeah, we catch up with them. But it takes somebody to pave the way, to do the first steps so others can follow, lead so others can follow. But big dreamers always win.
I wish I was there in person to shake your hand, but good luck. And we all hope you lead a long life and face a natural death at the end of it, and nothing premature.
That's what I hope too, Neil.
You're part of our pop culture understanding now. And I don't want to think of it as daredeviling as much as what are the limits? And let's just see what the limits are of what we can accomplish.
It's not daredeviling, because if you look at my background, and all the investigations that we do, like I said, this was a huge ongoing program. Never wanted to go from zero to hero. That's the reason why I always fight against the term daredevil. I'm a risk manager. Risk assessment is one of my big topics. That's what I'm doing.
You control the risks so that, in fact, you're not a daredevil at all.
Exactly right.
You got it. Okay, Felix. Let me just say, I have to say, because otherwise people will get on my case. I have publicly criticized the phrase "edge of space" because, as an astrophysicist, I know it's space, where it is, and
Yeah.
so I've shown people relative to a schoolroom globe how far up your jump was. It's about 1 millimeter above a schoolroom globe, and so relative to space, that's very close. But if you're standing there at that location, that's everything. So I just want to make sure we spent our half hour celebrating that fact. But the edge of space, I'm thinking space. No, that's when I think of
Starts at 100 kilometers.
at least that.
I don't really know, Neil. Let me just finish this, where this is coming from, because we most of the time say, jump from the stratosphere.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, exactly.
And then sometimes it went south, and I don't know if it's the meteor or something.
The press runs with it. Yeah.
They always put you on a different pedestal that I never wanted to be there. It was always a jump from the stratosphere, but they made it to the edge of space, then it's hard to fight back, because now you're not fighting against it, because how,
Right. Of course. You got it. Dude,
I'm an honest, decent guy.
It's
I always stick to the truth.
We'll be the judge of that. No, we've got you. Dude, it's been a delight to have you on StarTalk. Our fan base will delight in this conversation on the 10th anniversary. And a fast shout out to Red Bull for tracking you through this. Sponsors make so much happen in this world, and just give them a shout out as well. All right, this has been StarTalk, a special edition to celebrating the 10th anniversary of Felix Baumgartner's stratospheric jump, where he actually went supersonic. Okay. And he's still okay. He's like alive. Yeah. All right.
Good shape and happy as always.
All right, Felix, for next,
if you're
going to jump from the moon to Earth, we'll bring you back on the show and we'll talk some more. All right.
I'm going to break the speed of light the next time.
Oh, there you go. That's it. All right, dude.
Keep it real. See you, my friend.